Last few days before we begin the Easter Triduum, which of course starts with Holy Thursday, the readings, or at least the gospel readings, focus on Judas Iscariot and his betrayal. Recall how he had complained about the ointment that Mary had used to anoint our Lord's feet. And then yesterday we had an account of his going out at night to betray our Lord. And it's from a different gospel today, so it's a slightly different version. And notice how our Lord, when he reveals to his apostles that one of them is about to betray him, and each one says, "Surely not I, Lord." And it's kind of like there's a pause, and then eventually Judas also says, "Surely not I, Lord." And notice how our Lord says, "The one who has dipped his hand into the bowl with me will betray me." And it's kind of like our Lord is saying this openly, at least in this gospel passage. And after that, Judas says, "Surely not I, Lord." So it's kind of like he's not even there. He's not even paying attention. He's just saying it because everybody else is saying it. Maybe he's aware, I don't know, but we can only speculate to a certain extent, but he's in a different world. His mind isn't there. He doesn't realize what he's doing. He's blinded by his greed and whatever other ambitions he has. And so he's going to betray our Lord. And of course, we know that our Lord says that, this is the worst thing that anyone could do. So, but woe to that one by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would have been better for that one not to have been born. So this is Judas. And the question that often people ask is, well, why would Judas betray our Lord? He was one of the not just a disciple, but one of the apostles, one of those closest to our Lord, one of the ones who had spent the most time with our Lord, had witnessed the miracles of our Lord, witnessed him casting out demons, witnessed him escaping the traps laid for him by the Pharisees. And our Lord had sent Judas out 2 by 2 with the other apostles, and Judas probably did many miracles also, proclaimed the message of salvation, proclaimed the good news. And yet he ends up betraying our Lord. And it's a good reminder to us that this could happen to any one of us. And so it's important that we remain faithful. So where did Judas go wrong? I mean, we can only speculate as to the reasons as to why he did it. But it was mentioned earlier that he was a thief. He was in charge of the money bag. He had to go ahead and maybe buy provisions or things like that, and he would help himself to the money. Not just for things that he needed, but it's implied that he pocketed a lot of that money. So he was sinning. He was stealing. And these little sins, they can grow in proportion. Who knows how much he actually stole. And also when our Lord in his Eucharistic Discourse, chapter 6 of St. John's Gospel, it mentions there that our Lord knew which ones were the ones that did not believe. If you recall, our Lord reiterates, you have to eat my flesh. Unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man, you have no life in you. And it mentions that many of his followers departed and left our Lord, stopped following him because they found this teaching too hard. And it mentions that our Lord knew who were the ones who did not believe. And it's not clear, but it's kind of implied that some of those who stayed also didn't believe. So probably Judas didn't believe. So he's questioning our Lord. He's doubting our Lord in certain areas. And it's interesting, in the Gospel of St. Luke, in chapter 16, I believe it's chapter 16, our Lord makes the profound statement. He says, "Whoever is faithful in a very little is faithful also in much, and whoever is deceitful in a very little is deceitful also in much." So if we are faithful in little things, we will be faithful in great things. If we are deceitful or unfaithful in little things, we will be unfaithful in great things also. And this is why it's so important for us to be faithful to little things, because it's those little things that dispose us to be able to be faithful to great things when perhaps we are truly tested in regards to our faith. So it's very, very important. So Judas was a thief. It's very likely that he doubted our Lord. And so he questions our Lord. And one theory is that Judas betrayed our Lord not because he wanted him to be crucified or killed. In fact, it's kind of obvious that he regrets having done it, but instead of repenting and going back to our Lord asking for forgiveness, he ends up giving into despair and committing suicide. So Judas probably thought that our Lord is going about things the wrong way. Perhaps he thought that by betraying our Lord to the Jewish leaders, the Pharisees, the scribes, that would force Christ to manifest his wisdom to them, to manifest to them his power, so that they would be on board, that they would accept him also. Perhaps this was the plan of Judas. But notice that it mentions that he betrayed him for 30 pieces of silver. In other words, he had something to gain. And that's certainly a motivating factor also. So he may have thought these things, but wasn't necessarily going to do it. But then when he thought, okay, maybe I can get some personal gain out of this, the ideal appeals to him even more. And not only that, if he starts thinking that our Lord is going about things in the wrong way, he comes up with his own plan because he wants the Jewish leaders to accept Christ, because he wants Christ to inaugurate his kingdom, to make his kingdom present here and now. And like many of the others, Judas probably thought that there would be an earthly kingdom, and that he would be wealthy and rich and powerful and have a high position of authority and be able to lord it over others. So it's all about personal gain. So it's like he's going to betray our Lord for personal gain. Whether it's the 30 pieces of silver or Christ establishing an earthly kingdom, he's thinking of himself, personal gain. And worldly gain. And often, whether we realize it or not, we are the same way. And, recall that passage that I quoted, our Lord, he who is faithful in a very little will be faithful also in much, or is also faithful in much. So how about us? Are we faithful to Christ at all times? Isn't it true that every time we sin, we are being unfaithful to Christ? Or even when it's time for our prayers, it's kind of like we're betraying our Lord, denying him at that moment and saying, no, I need to do something else because of the personal gain that I will get by doing that something else. In other words, our priorities are all wrong. Instead of putting Christ first, instead of putting our prayer life, our spiritual life first, we tend to put other things first. And so often we are not faithful in little things. And so we shouldn't expect to remain faithful in great things. In other words, if great persecution comes, we will be like St. Peter, who denied our Lord 3 times. So how do we overcome this? How do we make sure that we will be faithful? By sticking to our routine, sticking to a schedule, trying to do our prayers when we're supposed to, waking up when we're supposed to, going to bed when we're supposed to. All these things, little things, go a long way to making us the kind of persons that we are called to be. So let us learn from the mistake of Judas how by little things, initially he probably just started taking little bits from the money bag, and then it became more and more, and he just became more and more greedy, more and more selfish. He doubted Christ in little things, and that doubt, that initial small doubt, led to bigger doubts, which eventually led to Judas even betraying our Lord and thinking only of himself, of his own personal gain, and not realizing, not understanding that he's doing the worst thing possible in betraying our Lord for personal gain. Just a brief reminder that tomorrow is Holy Thursday. There is no morning Mass. The Mass in the evening, the Mass of the Lord's Supper, will take place here at St. Aidan's at 7:30 p.m.